opportunity. We're going to get to talk about decision making, in times of crisis, and why is that important, and what's different about making decisions in crisis mode versus normal mode.
Sounds good, Richard. I also want to ask, I can correct this after the fact. I did not put your email address on the contact, the last slide.
Oh, that's fine. Yeah, because I would rather you put my SBDC email address, I think, than my
Well,
personal.
I thought that was the case, but and so I sent that. I asked you if you wanted it. So when I show it, it will have that. But what will go out, well, you know what? I don't know if I can correct that. We're recording already right now. This may be locked in. I'm scared to go change it right now.
Usually we don't turn on record until we let participants in.
Well, let me do this.
But
I don't know if this will allow me to fix this. I want to stop recording. Bear with me. Well, hello everyone, and welcome to our Business Builders Q&A. I'm Mike O'Neill with Bench Builders, and I'm going to be your host for today's Q&A session. Joining us today from Rome, Georgia is our expert panelist, Richard Montanaro. Welcome, Richard.
Thank you. I'm glad to be with you guys, Mike.
We're glad you are with us. Later, we're going to be hearing from my colleague, Rhonda Beard, as she explores some of the critical HR decisions that are likely impacting your employee retention, your engagement, and productivity. Welcome back, Rhonda.
Thanks, Mike. Good morning. And thanks for joining us, Richard. We're glad everybody's with us today.
We are glad you're with us, Richard and Rhonda. Just to remind those folks who are new to this, we've launched these Q&A sessions to help you as business owners, as key leaders, as HR professionals, stay on top of what the important issues are so that you can build your business. Just to kind of give you a sense of what you can expect, I'm going to advance the slide, or at least attempt to advance the slide. We are recording this, and so anybody who has registered will be getting an email with the recording and the slides. And the nature of this is one in which we want to hear from you. So if you don't have your chat box open, open that up and list what questions you may have for Richard or for Rhonda. And I'm going to be monitoring those questions throughout our time together. And as we can, I'm going to try to get as many of your questions answered while we're together live this morning. So let us hear from you. Before we move to Richard, I'd like to kind of hear from you now, and that is to give us a little bit of a sense of what your world is like right now. I'd like to do a kind of an informal poll. We're not going to do the official Zoom poll. Let's just keep it easy. Go to the chat box. Here's my question, and that is, have you seen an increase or a decrease in the COVID-related concerns from your employees? If you would go to the chat box and let us know, increase or decrease in the number of COVID-related concerns. Okay, we're seeing an increase. Let's continue to hear from you. Increase. In the case of Randy Waskell, he has responsibility literally global, and he's seeing an increase on a global basis. Definite increase, Christina says, even with our teams being remote. That's interesting. It's opened up new issues. Hey, thank you for letting us hear from you. Continue to let us hear from you throughout our time together this morning. We've asked Richard, of all the things he could speak on and speak very knowledgeably on, we asked him to kind of narrow that focus, and that is, as crazy as things have gotten, the importance as leaders to be able to make smarter, quicker decisions is no longer just a nice to have, it's a must have. And so we've asked Richard to speak to that. But before we get into that, I'd like Richard to kind of give us a little sense of who you are. Richard, welcome, and tell us about yourself, and most specifically, what is it you do for the UGA Small Business Development Center?
Thank you, Mike. Can you hear me okay?
We can hear you great. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, everybody. I'm very happy to be here with you this morning. I'm the area director for the University of Georgia Small Business Development Center. We provide small business consulting and education for any business that's basically defined as a small business by the SBA. In some cases, those are fairly large businesses, manufacturers with up to 500 employees, financial institutions with $100 million or less in assets, all qualify as a small business. And so everything from an independent tax preparer, one person shop, all the way up to a 500 person manufacturing organization. Now, those numbers sometimes are a little confusing because I'll have like a local subsidiary of a global manufacturer contact me and say, oh, we only have 140 people working for us here at blank, US, and we'd like you to provide services for us. And I said, yeah, but basically because in aggregate you have more than 500 employees, we're not allowed to provide services for you. So that's just, there are some breakdowns there. How does one find himself, in the position of area director for the Small Business Development Center? I started out working in the textile industry, moved up into the position of CEO of a company which I was able to sell to a private equity firm, got interested in private equity and consulting. I became CEO of a specialty chemical platform company that was owned by a private equity firm. And in that role, I became familiar with international trade agreements, CAFTA, NAFTA, and took advantage of those agreements in opening up factories in Central America to serve the textile market that had moved there. When we sold that company, I opened up a private shop and did capital formation, raised capital for businesses, did buy side, sell side engagements for a variety of different industries, but always a focus on turnaround and crisis companies, because those companies, if you know how to manipulate or maneuver in those situations, in those circumstances, are available sometimes at an attractive price. So that crisis management, turnaround management is one of the reasons why I selected that topic today. How to make decisions and what's the importance of making timely decisions in that kind of environment.
Well, Richard, there's no question. I want to see if we can go to a bigger screen that people can see you even better, hopefully under this setup here. Richard, you're clearly qualified to be speaking with us today. As area director, you're dealing with employers all over, but what I'm hearing you say is the top limit for the number of employees that your clients would have would be 500 employees. But I imagine that encompasses many, if not most, employers. Is that a fair description?
It is. In this area, for sure, it encompasses most. And remember, for the companies that are larger than that usually have a team of qualified MBAs working on these issues for them, or an outside firm like McKinsey, or one of the top price consulting firms would be in there working on their behalf.
And because we know each other, because I've done some work with y'all, with your clients, I know probably much more about you and your organization than maybe some of the folks here. We've got multiple states represented on this call. I think I understand we have folks not only from Georgia, but also Tennessee, Alabama, Texas. Do most states have something along the same lines as your organization?
Yeah, the SBDC is a nationwide network. It's funded by the SBA, Small Business Administration. About 50% of the funding for all SBDCs comes from the SBA, and then the other 50% comes from the state. Tennessee SBDC I work closely with, Alabama SBDC. I don't personally work closely with them, but our organization does. And the Texas SBDC, I've actually been out to Texas to train their consultants on different issues as it relates to alternative capital or alternative sources of capital. But So everybody on the call has access to an SBDC.
All right, that's good to know. We mentioned that of all the things you could talk about, we really wanted to kind of zero in on decision making, particularly in times like this. And now we know that you and your colleagues work with all types of employers. I describe an employer that has 499 employers is really not small. That is large by most standards. But what have you found, and what has your team found, particularly since COVID's come on strong, about decision making and the criticality of making smarter, quicker decisions in times like this?
Well, one of the things I'd like to do, if I can ask the attendees a question and get them to respond in the chat box, what is your position within your company? And just an estimate, how many decisions do you have to make every day on a normal day without being in crisis mode? How many decisions come across your desk? And while you guys are responding, I'll answer the question that Mike just asked for me. The number of decisions in crisis mode that a small business owner has to answer. And again, I think from the ownership perspective typically, or from the CEO chair, is significantly higher, and the decisions are more important and more critical. And what I found is that people have a very hard time making decisions. They get inundated with data, they're insecure, they don't know what's coming. We don't know what Congress is going to do next. We don't know what the Department of Labor is going to do next. So we're making decisions essentially in a fog. We're looking forward and we're trying to navigate, in the best direction we can, but we have so much indecision and so many unknowns. It becomes, for the average person, very difficult to make a decision, because what's our instinct? Well, let me see if I can clarify what Congress is going to do. That's an impossible, how are we going to figure that out until it's done and it's in stone? How are we going to know which programs are available for our employees go forward until they're published, until it's been vetted? How do we know what the right decision is when our first worker comes back and tests positive? Do we send them home? Do we send them home with pay? Do we let them come back to work? What do we do? It's all anecdotal. There's nothing out there that's published at that time. Pressure, right? There's a lot of pressure associated with those decisions, and people don't know what to do. Let's see, I see COO, easily 50 plus decisions in a day, from small to big, especially when you consider I'm also a mom, wife, caregiver for my father. That's a huge portion of decisions. You make decisions all the time. That's from Christina. Team sales leader, 15 to 20 decisions a day. What happens to the decision that we don't make? If we don't make a decision that day, guess what's still sitting on our desk the next day? The decisions that we didn't make from the day before, plus 15 to 20 new ones in Dan's case, or 50 plus in the case of Christina. So you'll quickly drown if you don't learn how to make decisions in an environment where you can't see the future.
Can you speak to that for a little bit, Richard? Excuse me for interrupting. And that is what I heard you say is you have to make lots of decisions. We're seeing that based on the feedback from our participants. And those number of decisions are probably going up. But what I think I understood you to say is a lot of these decisions hinge on something else. That is, we need more information. Is there a temptation then, when you've got a lot of decisions to make, to just try to put in the clutch and hold off to wait for more information?
That's the temptation. And if you do that more than twice, let's wait for more information. You get stuck in what I call analysis paralysis, because there's always going to be more information coming this day, the next day. And what happens is, in many cases, when you don't make the decision makes itself. Now, I'll give you just a quick example of that. And this is a non-crisis type of decision. You have a supervisor, or maybe an executive that's working for you right now that's near retirement age, does a decent job, does a reasonable job, is uninspired, isn't making any new progress for you. And you have two candidates who you are, seriously think should be able to replace him, or should, but you have to make a decision with them. And you're going to have to either find a way for this guy to retire, or offer him a buyout and promote one of these people, or, you're going to just decide to ride it out. The longer you take to make that decision, you run the risk of losing those two talented people that are sitting below, because in this world it's very easy to move and find another position. That's the risk. That's when I said the decision can make itself.
Now, as you may have noticed, we were getting some questions coming in already. On one hand, you're saying that it's important to make decisions quickly with the information you got. Randy asked the question, what if you make the decision based on information you got, but the information you got changes after the fact? Can that paralyze you?
It can, it can. So, but the trick is, make the decision that moves your organization forward in the fog, but also leaves you the most possible options to adjust. And there's not ever a perfect solution. But let's say in the situation, what do you do with an employee who reports positive and there's nothing else out there? You don't make a decision, but tomorrow 10 more people report positive. Now your problem is multiplied. So if you make the decision and then you find out after the fact, oh, I should have sent the employee home with pay because the CARES Act provides for this, then you know what to do. But at least you've made a decision under the best, under the best guidance that you have at the time. But you can adjust, you can move back from that position. Some positions, let's talk about financing, for example. In a crisis mode, how many businesses suffered revenue losses? Anybody want to raise their hand and say, yeah, our business suffered a revenue loss during the crisis? It's amazing because it's very industry specific. Some industries did not suffer any revenue crisis or any financial crisis during this COVID-19 pandemic so far, based on the industry that they were in, and others were completely paralyzed. But in the instance where a company was adversely affected and they needed to make a decision to borrow money for working capital, and so they started going out, and their normal process would be, let's go out to 3 or 4 banks, let's find out what's going to happen. And you get a proposal back from one bank for working capital at a certain rate, and you say that seems reasonably attractive, I could take that. But let's wait till we hear back from Truist and Regions Bank and Wells Fargo. And so the results start trickling in. While you're waiting, your major customer informs you that they're shutting down for a month, and now you can't get working capital from anybody. You've paralyzed yourself by not making a decision. Information changed, but the information changed in a negative way. We might have gotten an offer from Truist that was going to be, half a point lower for working capital. But if I had accepted my first offer and moved forward in crisis mode, recognizing that things can change dramatically, you make a decision. In this case, the decision made itself, and there'd be no working capital available through traditional sources in that particular environment.
So Richard, you're given a real world example by which waiting for more information actually hurt. And so what I guess what I'm hearing you say is you're encouraging us as leaders to take the best information we've got and make a decision, recognizing that the outcome could be influenced by something that's happened, like what you just kind of mentioned. In my former role in corporate HR, I've asked a question of the CEO: how much information do you need in order to make a decision? And his response was, just enough. And I thought that stuck with me. Are you somewhat agreeing with his comment? How much information do you need? Just enough?
I do. And the just enough varies. And the reason you can't specify is because the cost of the decision being wrong or can be death. When you walk into a turnaround situation, I'll give you another scenario. In my background, companies that are losing $1 million a month, and they don't have much time left. I mean, this is a company that's on life support. You can hear the EKG monitor beeping, but slowly, and you're not sure, which button, what are you going to do to make that heartbeat stronger? You've got decisions coming at you from all directions, limited knowledge about the future, but one sure thing, failure to make decisions will cost you significantly. So you try to make decisions that leave you room to adjust, leave you room to move. And the example I gave about working capital, if I took the first decision and it came back later that I could have gotten it for a half a point cheaper, somebody's going to criticize me. I run the risk of a board member coming back and say, you could have gotten that money for half a point cheaper. That's a risk. You're going to always run the risk of somebody coming back and second guessing you. However, I moved the ship forward, and in the event that my major customer went on hold for a month, I had working capital in the bank. I had a cushion to protect us through tough times when, under the other circumstances, we wouldn't have it. So there's no way to guarantee that somebody's not going to come back and Monday morning quarterback you. And that makes it difficult. If you're sitting in the CEO chair, typically we have a board of directors or people that we report to, owners that we may report to. So somebody's always second guessing you. And even if you don't, if you're the sole owner of your business, you've got employees who are going to second guess you and question your decision making. They might do it quietly under their breath, but we want to provide solid leadership. We want to consider them. And I want to talk about how many people in the group like to be consensus decision makers. I'll raise my hand. I don't know where the button is on my screen, but I like to make decisions on a consensus basis. Anybody else in the group? Just put in the chat. Yep, I like it, or no.
As they're responding, when you say consensus basis, what do you mean by consensus?
I have in my job here at the SBDC, I'm very much a consensus decision maker, and I'll explain to you why. As I'm giving you all of this advice, it might sound contrary to being a consensus decision maker, but I include my team. We discuss the outcomes that we're trying to get to and what paths we might use to get there, and we try to come to a point where we agree. This is, as a group, and it's a group of 4. It's not a huge group, but it's a group that we agree which way are we going to move forward. And that way I have buy-in from all of them, and I get a positive an effort out of all of them, and they all understand that they were part of the process. They go home feeling better about their role, and it's a great thing. And it's a luxury for me to be in that position, that I can be a consensus decision maker. And why do I have that luxury? Is because my funding comes through based on Congress's decision that our organization is worthy, and we have a positive ROI. We're doing the right things, but typically my funding source is very stable. I'm not even in crisis mode. My crisis is, how do I get people safely in and out of the office? Should I meet with clients or have my people meet with clients in person, or should we do everything virtually for right now? Those are the types of decisions I have to make. But when I'm in the private sector and I'm in a competitive environment, my funding is not guaranteed. I don't always have the ability to be a consensus decision maker. But I like Randy's answer. Randy says, hey, seek input, then move forward. Like I said, and I always seek input even when I can't have the luxury of building a consensus. But I do want people to have input. I want to know what their thoughts are in some cases when I have that luxury. I want to get buy-in when I can. Employees who have bought into decisions, especially critical decisions, it's important. One of the toughest things that we face in crisis mode is making layoffs. When do we decide that it's time to cut and downsize or right size our labor force? And I'd be curious if anybody on the phone has been, pushed into that decision as a result of COVID-19. And if you don't want to share that, that's fine. Again, my organization is actually growing. because we're providing services, considered essential workers, and we're providing essential service to the business community. So I've actually hired 2 people to put on and put out so I can reach more businesses in Northwest Georgia through our efforts. But most of my customers have been forced to consider a layoff or a reduction or a right size. And that's the advice I've given. My crisis management advice, number 1, has been right size your expenses to match your revenues. It's a difficult decision to make, but in the face of, I don't know what's happening next. I know the only cash that I'm guaranteed to have to operate with is the cash that I've got now. I don't know what's going to happen with credit sources, availability. I don't know what government programs are coming. I've got to conserve all the cash I have. So making that decision early saved a lot of businesses. And payroll protection. This is a good example too of what happens if something comes along that made your decision, not necessary. Well, we went ahead and we reduced forces, but the PPP program came along. Well, everybody who had laid off or reduced workforces when the PPP program came along were not penalized. They were allowed to bring those folks back on and pay them using that PPP money and qualify for forgiveness. So, in an unknown, make the decision that protects you, that gives you the most options to adjust. If the PPP program had not become available, employees that had been downsized or right-sized would have had unemployment as a backup, and maybe the federal unemployment would have come through or not. We don't know. Those are the decisions that you have to make in the fog, and that's why it's so difficult. Hopefully, you can see why people get paralyzed. I don't criticize. I just try to help people. I say, listen, what happens if? That's how I coach my clients. What happens if there is no help? What happens if? What decision can we make today that gives us the ability to adjust based on potential outcomes? And so it's not always optimal. It's, the optimal decision would obviously be, let's wait for all the information to come in. But in so many cases that requires you to, predict the future accurately. It's almost impossible.
So, Richard, as you were speaking, we've gotten some more feedback. It looks as if there is consensus amongst our participants that they have been economically impacted by COVID that has required them to look at things to include staffing. Your advice, number 1 advice that you give clients and that your consultants give clients is in times of uncertainty, that is, you said right size your expenses to match your revenues. Make those type of hard and fast decisions early on. Randy made a comment is that what they had to do is do a major reorganization. And I don't know if that entailed layoffs or not, but a major reorganization that it impacted just about everybody. In the case of Randy, he says, I'm living with those changes, but he said, but it was the right decision. Some of the decisions that we have leaders on this call, you have to make decisions that are, quote, the right decisions, but they are not easy decisions to make and not easy decisions to communicate. How do you advise your clients what tips do you give them when a tough decision has to be made that's going to impact them? What do you advise your clients to do, and how do you convey what may be bad news?
Let me start with one of the things when it comes to decisions on cutting staff or reduction in force. I recommend getting an outside person to come in and work with you on making those decisions as to who. Usually a CPA, somebody who can help you look at the numbers and not at the person, because those hard decisions, it's almost impossible for even the toughest CEO, the most grizzled turnaround executive, not to take into consideration the personal aspects or the personal preferences of people that they work with or they get to know or build a bond with. And also that they depend on. And the question is, I can't live without this person. But we, even as CEOs, we can get caught up in the details that it's hard. An outside perspective can be very helpful. As it comes to communicating the message or the bad news, negative message, I always communicate it personally. I've never had a reduction in force where I didn't speak personally to everybody, even if that was more than 100 people, personally, explain what was going on, why. And in those cases, explain that it was nothing that they did, which is a very sad situation, a very difficult thing to communicate. The people who are left, in the case of Randy, he's dealing with this reorganization and he's still there. How you communicate to the we'll call it the survivors, or the folks who are there dealing with the reorganization, who saw several people that they cared about, they like, maybe even family members let go. How do you keep them on board and motivated and working for your company and working in that regard? So I think you communicate the what ifs. If we hadn't done this, we could face this. We make decisions based on trying to keep as many people employed as we could as well. These decisions were really, really tough. It was what we consider to be for the common good, the good of the company, the good of the rest of the employees. But just try to communicate to them the rationale, the reasoning. And it's not easy. So having some employee support, and this, from Mike, this is something I know you've had to deal with, and Rhonda probably as well, is, making sure there's some kind of support from HR for those employees to deal with the loss or the grief or the frustration of dealing with the change.
Well, without a doubt, I know Rhonda's going to speak in part to that. We've been talking about so much about the negative aspects of COVID because it has impacted businesses. And what we see in the headlines is the economic downturn. But we actually do have folks who business has actually increased. We've got a COO on the call right now who business has increased. And the temptation is when business goes up is to go hire people. And Christina writes that she resisted that temptation, and that is she very much matched the increase in business to what she had and augmented using 1099 employees versus hiring. Does it look like Christina is on the right path?
Christina could work for me anytime.
Oh, okay. No, you can't have her because she helps us a great deal.
No, I'm just saying, I'm just, that the idea of making the decision, growing, but minimizing the risk. I know I'm paying more for 1099s. I know my total cost is higher for 1099s than for employees, but my risk and my overhead is greater if I bring them on as employees and have to let them go. If I'm not sure where this, if the future is uncertain, the 1099 route for me is a great way to go. But I think it's also wonderful and a testimony to the company and the leadership that they're growing during this crisis. And I think that's great. I see here she asked, what numbers do you recommend tracking to employees' effectiveness? And yeah, I agree with you, Christina. Hours on the clock isn't the number. And it's going to vary greatly depending on their role. But productivity, I always look for productivity indicators. And they're usually in customer service, you can find numbers. In sales, for sure, you can find numbers. So, depending on the type of role you're looking at is what those indicators are going to be. But I don't have a broad or a specific answer. But productivity indicators much more so than hours, than time worked.
So, Richard, as you know, we've had our panelists on here and we've talked through a variety of scenarios. One of the things we've talked at some length is how quickly companies had to adapt to remote work. And you're kind of speaking to that. And that is a lot of companies had to adapt to remote work. And what that meant was they were really measuring based on how many hours a person was working because they're right there with them. When you go to remote work, you're not right there with them. And so you have to kind of trust that what they're doing. But the decision that a leader in that case has to make is be less concerned about how many hours in the seat and much more focused on what they're getting done in the time that they're doing it. You're nodding, so you're agreeing with that comment.
I am, and it's unfortunate. There are some CRM program. I mean, some of the methodology of tracking productivity can seem very impersonal and unfair at times. And I'll give you an example. I have a client who processes medical claims and deals with disputes in medical claims. And so their employees are on a system, and they can judge how many claims they can see how many claims did you process today? How many refunds did you process today? How many clients did you serve today? And those are productivity numbers, but all claims are not created equal. Some claims, they have to sit on the phone with, Blue Cross Blue Shield for an hour and a half to resolve one claim. So some days they might resolve 90 claims. Some days they might resolve 9 claims, and they worked just as hard. So it's finding the right metric is important, but definitely some form of productivity metric, because time measured. These systems also measure how many hours are on the clock. So hours on the clock is the minimum. That's the minimum requirement. Then productivity on top of that.
This is probably more of a comment than a question, but Randy shared that in today's climate, if there is a decision that has to be made and that has perhaps a negative impact on individuals, he's kind of echoing what you said, and that is the personal touch is very, very critical. And that is sitting down to the best of his ability with each and every one who is impacted and giving them as much information as he possibly can to explain why that decision has been made. Some of these decisions that have to be made means that folks are being displaced. And Randy is kind of pointing out that that doesn't mean you can't be of help to them as they move on to their next role. And so what Randy is sharing with us is that because you have shown empathy towards that employee and your willingness to help them move on to the next thing, that goes a long way. So Randy, thank you for that comment.
It's an interesting comment, and Randy, I appreciate that as well. What I will suggest for larger companies, having a third party come on and do a job fair for displaced employees isn't a bad idea, but getting them some sort of portal, but that you as an employer are not connected to. And the reason that I say that is just navigating the web of legal potential issues of things you might do for one employee that you don't do for another employee or a former employee or whatever, but whatever the perception is, just navigating that human resources liability of how are we dealing with separated employees, just making sure that we're not showing preference or doing anything that's preferential or considered preferential, inviting a lawsuit. So I always get that third party in as a separate, something to buffer me from the activity. Yes, I want to help them. I want to be seen as helping them. And I genuinely want to help, but I also want a buffer between me and the process so that it doesn't come back to us as we did something preferential.
So Richard, I appreciate you mentioning HR. We're going to move to Rhonda here in just for a moment. Can you stay with us?
Yes, I sure can.
Rhonda would like to cover some things. I know I'm going to have some questions from her, but then we'll come back to you here in just a few minutes. Rhonda, Richard mentioned several things from an HR standpoint and how important that organizations support HR. But HR sometimes may feel like they're out there kind of by themselves. For some folks on this webinar, they wear multiple hats. They're the business owner, they're the business leader, they are HR. So they have to make those kinds of decisions. Can you speak to how these HR related decisions can impact things such as retention?
Sure, and there's a number of things that Richard mentioned that I can certainly echo. I'm not going to repeat what Richard has said, other than a couple of communication tips for sure. Any type of bad news, obviously you need to communicate in person. Communication is extremely important in tough times right now. And we've talked about this in a number of other webinars we've had, but for those that haven't been on those webinars, you really need to step up efforts to let employees know that you care. Not only is HR dealing with that, but if, as Mike said, if you're in any type of a management role, you're dealing with HR issues, whether you have HR in your title or not. If you work with people, you're dealing with people issues and people concerns. And there's so many more of those right now than there has been in the past. And a lot of the people issues are getting into more personal lives of your employees than maybe you have in the past. So, you're learning and hearing and getting involved in employees' family situations, their health situations, their financial situations, and they're looking to management and leadership and HR to make decisions and take action. So action is good, and it may not always be the right action. As Randy said, what if you're making a decision based on something and it changes? That's happened 100 times in the last couple months. It's happened to people hundreds of times because things are changing so rapidly. But you really can't wait until you have all the information, because you never will. And Mike's comment about having just enough, well, just enough is different for different people. But again, as a manager or HR rep, employees are looking for action. They're looking to see, what is a company that we're doing? What kind of action are we taking to get the right things in place for them and make them feel comfortable and safe? So action is really important right now. And a lot of things that HR has gotten involved in are figuring out where people are working. What's the best place for them to work? Is it at home? Is it at the office? Is it some combination? Do you need to reconfigure your workspace? What type of safety and health measures, cleaning measures do you need to put in place? What type of emotional support might employees need? You may have employees who've lost family members or have family members in the hospital. So there's so many personal things going on right now that we have to really step up and make decisions that are affecting people's personal lives as well. But in that type of role, especially where you may have a shared role and you're not just full-time HR, you also have that dilemma of business decisions and people decisions. And business decisions are no doubt top of the list right now, with so many businesses, as Richard said, maybe struggling financially, having to change product offerings, decide whether you're going to stay open, decide where people are working. There's so many decisions to be made. And yes, it can be overwhelming. But again, employees are looking for action. They're looking for leadership to be doing something rather than just talking about it or waiting to see what's going to happen. And I think some of the more critical things right now that HR or managers should be looking at and should be taking action on as it relates to employees, first are communication plans, making sure that you're staying in front of issues with employees and you're proactively communicating to them what's changing or what you're expecting or what's going to happen. Employees want to know, even if it's bad news, they want to know rather than not know. So if something is coming, changes are going to happen. I know, from previous work in HR, a lot of times you want to keep things kind of quiet from people until you know everything for sure and not say anything until you have to. And that just doesn't really work anymore. People want to be informed. So you don't want to tell them things if you're not fairly certain about it. But if you're fairly certain, you want to give people notice and keep them informed on a regular basis with ongoing communication, what's happening and what they can expect and how it may impact them. I think another topic is also what your emergency and safety plans are. So this has caused a lot of companies to take a look at planning for pandemics, for emergencies, for work outage, for people not being at work. A lot of people didn't have plans for that. And that's something that HR really and managers can step up and take that initiative if you don't have those plans in place, to make sure that you're looking at them and getting them in place now so that you're better prepared for what's going to happen next. Because we never expected this, and look what we're going through. So what's next? We have no idea. But as Richard said, and I have this in my notes too, what ifs. Helping with the what if scenarios, thinking through what could happen next. What if this happens? What if we have another huge wave of COVID like it's being predicted? What are you going to do? How are you going to handle that? How are you going to plan for it? What do you need to tell employees? So having those plans and being proactive and showing people that you're thinking through these situations and trying to create an environment as best as possible that you can for them, where they're going to be safe, they're going to be healthy, they have security. That's going to be really important to people, and it's going to definitely help with employee engagement. Employees are going to see that their company cares about them. Something else that HR, I think, has really been faced with quite a bit is in situations where companies may have limited budgets or may have financial constraints right now, what can you do for employees? You know, incentives may have gone away, bonuses may have gone away, a lot of activities that companies do for employees may have gone away. So trying to think creatively of positive things that you can do to try to boost employees' morale during some really tough times. So again, getting some help with that, you know, brainstorming with people, asking, there's nothing wrong. I've always encouraged people, go out and ask employees, what's important to you? What's important to you at work? Find out what's important to them, and don't make decisions in a vacuum based on what you think from sitting in your office and looking from the outside, but ask people what's important to them and try to get some things in place that do make a good, safe work environment for them. Training, it's a great opportunity to offer something really positive to people during a time, again, that's tough, and offer them the opportunity to learn a new skill, to increase their skill set, to train them for a new role that they might be interested in. And there's a lot of online training that can be done, virtual training, you know, some companies are still doing some in-person meetings in small groups. So you can certainly do training in small groups as well, but it's a really positive step towards letting employees know that you care about their future and their well-being, and we're still investing in them. So even during times that are really tough, you still have to run your business and you still have to make decisions to keep that business moving forward. And a lot of those right now are centered around people, what to do with people, how to help people, you know, keep working, feel safe, feel like their company cares about them, and making sure that you have, again, all of the right plans, policies, benefits in place going forward. A lot of companies are having to make changes to their benefit plans, make changes to their policies based on offering more leave time or setting up remote work situations and guidelines. So just take a look at that. And again, that demonstrates to employees that you're taking action, you're moving forward, and you're not sitting and waiting to see what's going to happen. Because if you're sitting and waiting, then there's a lot of uncertainty with them as well, and they're not going to feel comfortable with that. So the more certainty and action and decisions and information you can give them, the better they're going to feel about their position and the company. And again, as Mike said, help increase retention, increase employee satisfaction, and show them that you're a company that cares about people. But they're going to be looking for action. They're looking for things to happen. So you won't always have all the information, and we definitely don't have all the information now, but sharing what you have, when you have it, and giving them as much as you possibly can is going to put them in a better position and feel much more secure about their situation, whatever it might be. It's just really tough right now. And again, there's no right answer. There's no perfect solution, but letting employees see that you're trying to proactively plan and take action that's in their best interest is going to go a long way for you as an employer.
Rhonda, we've had some good questions come in as you're speaking. I'm going to try to do these kind of in order. One of the questions came up. You stressed the importance of good communication in times like this, but communication can also take a different form. What about gossip in the workplace? And specifically, the question was centered around the gossip that might go along with someone who might be positive or potentially tested positive. What is it that you would advise the folks on this call and clients on how to manage gossip in today's fast-changing, gossip-rich environment?
Well, again, I think the more you communicate with them and give them facts and details, the less there will be gossip. But in a situation like you mentioned, for instance, someone gossiping about, you know, maybe testing positive for COVID. First of all, I think most people know you can't share that information. You can't share medical information about any employee with other employees. We certainly have an obligation to let people know if they've been exposed, but you can't share with them who has tested positive. Now, in a small company, they're probably going to know. But as management or HR, you need to be very careful what type of information you share. One thing a company I worked with a while back did when a lot of gossiping like that was going on is had a session called Rumors and Reality. And once a week, they'd get the employees together. And I know that's tough to do now, but you could also do it in an email or a printed version and just addressed any questions that employees had and would put to bed whether it was reality or whether it was a rumor. So something like that can be effective if you get those, if you're hearing that gossip or you're hearing those questions, to just address it quickly and make sure you get information out so that people know whether it's true or not. But you also have to be careful, you know, with privacy and legal information, what you can and cannot share, and explain to them why that is as well.
We have also with us today folks from the medical field, and the question kind of came up with, and this may end up applying just equally well to you, Richard, as well, and that is, it's a new business, been in business for less than a year. So there's not a lot of track record of what we may have done in the past. They're at a kind of a crossroads. Do we hunker down to survive, or do we use this as an opportunity to go out and thrive? That's a kind of a business decision in times like this. You don't know what's going to happen, but you need to make a decision. Are we focused on surviving or on thriving? Ron, I'm going to start with you. Your thoughts on that question.
Well, I think right now a lot of companies are definitely focusing on surviving. And one person I worked with years ago made a comment when I was in a company where we were in survival mode. You can't lose sight of tomorrow, though. So you always need to have 1 foot in today and 1 foot in tomorrow, which I think is really good advice. So even though, you know, you may be in survival mode and a lot of the day-to-day decisions that you're making are based on what you know today, again, you still can't lose sight of tomorrow. You still can't lose sight of proactively planning. And when we're talking about employee decisions, as I said, so many things are reactive right now, and trying to be proactive is very tough when you don't have that information. But if you can always try to divide your time between 1 foot in today and 1 foot in tomorrow. And tomorrow is what's going to help you thrive. Today is just getting you through survival. And so many companies are in that mode right now. It's hard to think beyond today, or even, you know, beyond COVID. What is this going to look like? We don't know, but you have to make some plans. And those plans may change and you may have to tweak them, but you have to make some plans and you have to be thinking forward.
Richard, how would you piggyback to Rhonda's comments?
You make decisions based on definitely trying to, you know, if your business is in a growth mode or a growth position and you need to invest to grow your business, you're going to do that. You're just going to have to be, you might have to be more conservative. You don't want to leave yourself no other options. And I'll give you an example. If you need $100,000 for a piece of new equipment, that's going to allow you to service new business that has come available, but that's going to leave you without working capital, without flexibility. You're going to have orders. You're going to have sales to come in as you're projecting, you know, for the next 6 months to make that a good decision. Now, it looks like it's a no-brainer. They're going to give you a contract for that level of sales, but in an environment where we are not sure of what the possible negatives of a COVID or a second wave are, it might not make sense to invest all of your capital in one new deal, even though it's a very lucrative new deal. Because what can go wrong? They gave me a contract. They can still shut down. They can default against the contract. So we make decisions that leave us a little bit of room to navigate in case, you know, in case something else happens. Many new businesses, the owners invest all of their personal wealth to get the business started, and they borrow all of the money that they can borrow to get started. And I've seen, unfortunately, you know, in 7 years with the SBDC, probably 100 cases like this where people invested everything they had and borrowed everything they could, and their projections didn't work out and they lost it all. And that's in various industries, from restaurants to, small manufacturing. Those things can happen. But again, they didn't leave enough capital, enough working capital to adjust. What if my model's not quite right? What if the buying public or the consumer doesn't see my offering just exactly the way I do, and I have to change and pivot slightly, but I don't have the money to pivot. I don't have any breathing room to pivot. So if I'm in this situation, but what typically happens to customers like this or clients like this is they don't make decisions. You're talking about the decisions that they'll sit and they'll wait for more information. They'll wait for more information. And again, what happens in that case, the decision gets made for them. A new competitor enters the marketplace and fills that gap that they thought that they needed to fill.
The word of this time together has been decisions, and it's hard to summarize everything. I hope that the folks who have been with us have gained some insights on how do you go about making smarter, faster decisions. I'm going to attempt to see if I can do this without messing things up, and I may have already done so. I am sharing my screen and I'm trying to advance this. Hopefully what you see here on your screen is what's next. Is that what you're all seeing?
Yes, sir.
Excellent. Just to give folks an idea, what we hear on these Q&A sessions basically give us an idea of who we want to invite to be an expert panelist. What we hear on these Q&A sessions basically helps us pick topics for our blog articles, which come out on a pretty regular basis. And I hope folks on this webinar are actually getting our blog articles. We've already come up with maybe some possible blog article titles based on Rhonda, a comment you made, and that is 1 foot in today and 1 foot in tomorrow, planning for a future in survival mode. So that's a classic example of what you just shared with us, how that probably will end up being used in a future blog article. Let me give folks kind of what they can look forward to next Thursday, and that is a new friend of mine, Brian Rutberg. He is a customer connection expert. And one of the things that you mentioned, Richard, is paramount, that you match your expenses to your revenues. He's going to pretty much stress the importance of don't forget about your current customers. And so he's going to be emphasizing that point. And I hope that you would find that what he's going to be advising is in keeping with what you advise your clients, Richard. So I do want to thank both of you. I just want to kind of remind folks who have kind of joined us today, and that is at Bench Builders, we really enjoy helping businesses, perhaps just like yours, equip leaders. Recently, I was asked, if you were to summarize to a word or two, what is it that we do for clients? We've kind of come up with equipping leaders. And that is equipping leaders to spend less time distracted by problems and more times focus on improving your bottom line. We have here also the contact information. Richard, with the Small Business Development Center in Georgia, this is his contact information that will be included in the slides as well as ours as well. I cannot believe that we have zipped through yet another hour. Richard, thank you for spending part of your day with us and sharing your insights as an area director of the Small Business Development Center. They're based in Rome, covering all of Northwest Georgia. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you for the invitation. I just want to remind everybody, mask up, stay safe, use hand sanitizer, encourage everybody you know to do the same thing. And hopefully the next time we have this call, we won't be talking about COVID-19.
Well, I would love to think that's going to be the case. Thank you for the reminder. Rhonda, as always, enjoyed being with you this morning. And therefore, on behalf of Bench Builders, thank you for being with us today. Go out, mask up, use hand sanitizers, social distance, stay safe, and we hope to see you again soon. Thanks, everybody.